Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I appreciate it. I titled this panel Cash, the most important resource in the resource business, because for so many of the companies out there on the show floor, they live and die by their last financing. But there's a lot to this business. I think cash is the most important thing, but I love it when the panelists correct me on that thesis. And so maybe my first question will actually be to add a question mark to the panel title, and I want to ask the panelists, is cash the most important resource in the resource business? And if not, I'd love to hear your perspective. And Maria, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Jay. Well, I've been investing in mining companies for about 20 years now, and certainly we invest at different endpoints or different stages of life of companies. We invest in early stage companies, exploration companies, we invest in development companies, and we invest in production companies. So I would argue that depending on the stage of the company, cash could be the most important resource. But at some point, as you enter production, you start generating cash as well. And so that just comes to you. But I would also say that when I look at companies, I look at three main buckets, or three legs of the stool. And that is people, so management teams, people, any consultants they hire, the team, right? What's the team? Have they done this before? What is the knowledge they have? The number two is the asset, geology, location. You can't change geology, by the way, right? That's one thing you cannot change. You can change the people. You can change your financial position, but you can't change geology. And number three is the financial situation of the company, be it cash, be it having revenues, no revenues, et cetera, et cetera. So I kind of like to take a more holistic approach to things.
So I like that comment. You can't change the geology, you can change the people. If I were to tell you, but if you choose the right people, they'll worry about the geology for you. What do you think about that perspective?
I agree with that, but it's not that they will worry about geology. They'll worry about how to maximize the geology, if that makes sense, right? How to surface the value, how to be efficient at it, how to deploy the cash in a most efficient and effective way, right? So going back to our subject, cash is important because you do have things to do as a company. You want to discover pounds or ounces. You want to discover the resource and you want to move it towards production. But people definitely optimize that process.
Okay, thank you. Alex, I'd like to pass it over to you. Cash, the most important resource or not?
I think absolutely it is. When you've got availability of cash, whether it's through various forms of getting that, and we'll I think talk more about that later on, you need cash to thrive. Without cash, companies are constrained. It's difficult to move forward. So absolutely, I think cash is the most important resource.
And if I were to ask, following that thread, these companies raise some capital, they put that to work, that dictates their ability to raise capital in the future, because depending on what they do with that money, hopefully put it in the ground, generate some results, increase the value, go back to the market for more capital. Is there a minimum amount that you think is relevant for a company to raise when you could say, that 2 million plus, you got my attention. Is there a number or a threshold that you think is a productive raise versus a non-productive raise? Does that make sense?
It does, but there's so many different aspects to mining, whether it's exploration, development, production, as you were referring to. From Empress's point of view, we invest sort of $5 to $10 million into companies, but we're focused on ones that are producing, that are going to bring immediate cash. So the ultimate number of how much you raise is there's so many factors. I don't think you can generally make that statement.
Yes. Okay.
Its sector is so diverse.
100%. Okay, great perspective. And Natasha, same question for you. Is cash the most important resource?
Well, I would say the most important resource is the team. You have to have a good team. But beyond that, I think cash is incredibly important, because when you're in the resource space, you have to be ready to pivot, right? And cash gives you the ability to pivot, it gives you flexibility, and it gives you control. So you are able to make the decisions when you see, okay, this geology is different than we thought, or maybe we want to make an acquisition, right? I mean, that's when you can act quickly and you can take advantage of opportunities in the market. So yeah.
Okay, yes, thank you. Mr. Rule, what's your take?
Rick, please. I don't think cash is the most important. I think people are the most important, but I think cash is the most underrated.
Okay.
When people hear a narrative, by people here I mean the people in the audience, when they hear a narrative from the booth, they get excited. They never get excited about cash. they often don't get excited about the resumes around the people. They get excited about the fact that, if some prospector's mule hadn't died 50 years ago, the original owner would be a billionaire. Whatever the narrative is, cash is the most underrated asset. When I was a lender, and people would talk to me about the cost of capital, my cost of capital, which I always thought was modest, by the way, and they'd say, the cost of capital is extraordinary. And I said, have you ever considered the cost of not having capital? This is a capital-intensive business. If you don't have capital, you have no business. So I think cash, while it's not exciting, cash is an enabler. And if you don't have cash, you eliminate your ability to cause things to occur.
But Rick, I know you're the moderator, but I have a question.
I was afraid of that.
Take it away.
Do you not think that depends on the cycle we're in? Like if a roaring bull market, a company can always go and raise more cash.
Yeah, absolutely, but you can't count on it. There was a point in time where people favored just-in-time capital, and that had a very unhappy ending for a lot of them. In fact, it was the people who counted on just-in-time capital that would occasionally have to visit Uncle Rick. People who relied on just-in-time capital became very good customers for me, which was not necessarily great for their shareholders.
Going back to the people comment, obviously,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, you want to raise cash when you don't need it. That's effectively what you're saying, right? Okay.
The old ineloquent phrase in Vancouver is when the ducks quack, feed them, meaning when cash is available, take it.
Yeah, okay. Now, when I surveyed the audience this morning about who was at this conference for the very first time, about half the hands went up. It was a really large number. So I don't want to take anything for granted today when it comes to this industry. We have a lot of new investors here, and I've chatted with a lot of them today. A lot of them aren't new investors, but they're new to the mining business, which is a pretty unique business, especially the junior mining business. So, all these companies out here are here to raise capital, and there's, generally speaking, 4 ways with which they do that. They just raise direct equity. Sometimes they might do debts. They might set up royalty and streaming agreements, or they might set up some joint venture partnerships to raise capital through those vehicles. We have an expert actually on all 4 of those methods today, and so I want to go down the line. I'm going to start with equity, and I'm going to start with yourself, Maria. So, pros and cons of companies out here that do direct equity raises.
Because we invest in equity, I am a fan of equity raisers for obvious reasons. But, the criticism on equity raises usually is, it's so much dilution. You're diluting your stock. Well, okay, if we go back to the comment, you should raise when the ducks are quacking and feed them, right? And I know examples of great companies who looked ahead for their needs ahead of time, and their stock ran and they raised at that point. They limited dilution, they got their money in the door, and when they needed the money to build the mine, they actually built the mine. That's in an ideal world, that's how you do it. I always have met with CEOs who would sit there and go, well, when my stock reaches $1, or when my stock reaches $5, I'll raise at that price. And I go, okay, I've heard this movie before. If you need money, sometimes you just need to raise, right? And famous last words, when my stock does this, I'll do that. Half the time it doesn't happen. So for me, equity can be criticized, but and by the way, lots of companies nowadays, the producers, are buying back stock. They're reducing their share capital, giving money back to shareholders. So if you succeed, there's ways you can fix your capital structure over time, but you have to succeed first.
Is that a bit of an art timing that? Because, if the market's heating up and you feel like your share price is going to appreciate, you're going to want to raise at that higher valuation, but that's not a guarantee. That may or may not happen, and if it doesn't, you find yourself raising cash when you need it, not when you have it.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay. Alex, over to you. I'd love you to walk us through the second vehicle that we'll talk about today, which is the royalty and streaming model. So we have a handful of royalty and streaming companies on the floor. Alex runs Empress Royalty. They finance companies just like this all over the world. As she mentioned, her deal size is generally $5 to $10 million. That's the sweet spot for you?
Yep, right now.
So pros and cons of that model, Alex.
Yeah, so we're both a royalty and a streaming company. And for new investors to the mining sector, a royalty is where we invest in a company and we receive a percentage of revenue. A stream is where where we invest, we're able to get gold or silver at a discounted price. Typically, we pay 20% of spot, which is like an 80% discount. So at Empress, we directly invest into companies. So again, we're not buying third-party existing ones, and we're able to provide directly to them the financing they need, whether that is part of debt, some equity, a combination, or it's just a stream. It's less dilutive than equity, it's less restrictive than debt. So we're finding a lot of opportunities in that. And again, it's global access to capital for companies.
Okay, and just the flip side of that transaction, on your side, what's the advantage of setting up these royalty agreements today when maybe the market's a bit depressed versus a hot market?
Yeah, there's a lot more opportunity because the equity markets haven't been there for some of these companies. Some of the ones we're doing are also private, so they don't have access to the equity markets and necessarily debt. But there's definitely a lot of opportunity there, and that's what we're seeing right now in the market.
Can I ask you which directions are most appealing to you right now? Is there certain jurisdictions, certain company size? Like, what's on the shopping list for a company like yours right now?
Gold and silver only. Those are the only commodities doing is very important to us. We want it to be cash producing or near-term cash producing because we really want that revenue to come in so then we can reinvest it. We're globally open, so we're looking in South America and Africa, and that's a key to Empress and where we're seeing some really good returns. Our portfolio IRR is about 30% right now.
Okay. Natasha, I want to pass it over to you as our resident M&A lawyer. And if you could take us to school in a few minutes on a typical JV structure in this business and why a company would execute on that.
Sure. So, JVs, they're a very interesting structure, and they can be a great vehicle for a lot of companies. But they're not an off-the-shelf product. They're very different from raising equity or, going for a bank loan or that kind of thing, right? It's like a marriage, right? You're getting into a long-term strategic relationship with somebody, and the benefit of that is that they're going to be there for the long term. They're going to be funding your ongoing costs of developing a project. The negative of that is they're very expensive and complex to negotiate, and they're very expensive and complex to administer. Right? And if a JV goes bad, you're then in a problem, where you have to unwind, you've got all kinds of conflicts, maybe with a much larger counterparty. Because the typical structure is, maybe a small junior mining company that, needs cash and has tenure, owns an asset, there's a lot of potential there, and a larger company coming in to provide some expertise and funding. And, it can be great in the right circumstances, but it doesn't work in all circumstances, and, it's definitely not easy or simple to do, yeah.
Could I ask you a question on that? And anybody is welcome to weigh in if they want to. What, if you were to guess, the percentage of JVs that actually end up being accretive for shareholders versus maybe two companies that are really just looking for news flow and they put something together? What's your take?
The percentage,
you could
that's
say
hard.
most
Maybe
or less than most.
Better guess than me. I would say there are some that are going to be very big wins when they're done for the right reasons and with the proper diligence, and often they'll be done in a developing jurisdiction where maybe the government requires a local party, so for that big party to come in, the international player, they need a local partner. There's no way the project would get done. But yeah, if somebody's just bringing in a partner to sort of try to pump up their share price, or, you have to look at the terms, and you're not always going to be able to find out what those terms are. They're not always fully public. So there's definitely a lot of instances where they do fall apart or where they aren't accretive.
Okay, thank you. Rick, any thoughts on anything that the panel has shared thus far? And then if you could touch on the frequency of debt financing in an industry like this and how those deals are structured.
In terms of debt, I think all three of the panelists have said there's no one size fits all. You try to do a transaction that fits the borrower, and there are various debt structures. I came up in the business, as you know, doing bridge lending, providing debt for people to accomplish a short-term goal with the idea that they would later back me out with cheaper capital, either equity or some form of senior debt. And that's worked well. At Sprott, we had larger needs on the balance sheet, so we began doing construction financing, for a different size company. So I really think, it's a sort of a one-size-fits-all structure. The attraction of debt, everybody that ever came to borrow money from me, everybody without fail, said my stock is grievously undervalued. Sometimes I had to educate them on what their real value ought to be. But when they said that, that always gave me room, flexibility in terms of the rate I was going to charge them. saying, whatever you think that my cost of debt is, you've just told me what your cost of equity is. So by definition, I'm cheaper. And then I'd watch them try and walk it back. But I guess the point is there's no one size fits all. As a lender, I can take a lower internal rate of return than I would ask for as an equity holder, because by the nature of the transaction, if it's a secured loan, at the end of the exercise, whether I want it or not, the asset's mine, not theirs. And my coupon, assuming that I get paid, A, reduces my risk and allows me to recycle the cash. For me, those were attractive structures, and I became mature enough as I was a lender to make sure that they were attractive structures for the borrower's viewpoint too. Often the borrowers were too aggressive, and often I had to sort of apply adult supervision to temper the aggression of the issuer, to protect them from themselves. And I would tell them when they came in the room, listen, whatever happens, it's going to have a happy ending for me. Whether or not it has a happy ending for you is entirely different, and you need to think through what we're talking about here. You know, it's important. But there's parts to all structure. One of the things that I wanted to add on to what Maria said is, for the very small company, it isn't just getting the money. It's who you get the money from. In small companies, if you can attract people who bring you more than money, that's really, really, really important. It could be like with Eric's Brada franchise. It could be like Jonathan Goodman, spectacular technical support. But it isn't just about getting the money. It's about getting money from good folks. The attraction, I think, with what Alexandra does from an issuer viewpoint, is if you isolate gold and silver revenue in a stream, particularly if you're an issuer that's a copper issuer, the cash flow is worth more segregated than it is together. So she can pay disproportionately for the same revenue, and both parties are rewarded in the market. I hope the theme that you're hearing here is win-win. That's the way the structures have to be. Then finally, with regards to the joint ventures, although it takes patience, when you ask how many turn out being successful, when I went to university, I was taught that 1 in 3,000 mineralized anomalies became a mine. Other people have told me that if you're smart, it's 1 in 100, much better. But by that definition, virtually every joint venture ever written is accretive, because you didn't waste money on an exploration project that ultimately failed. When I look in the exploration business, I think I've participated maybe 70 prospect generators. I've participated in 25 economic discoveries and 21 takeovers. That means I've had a 33% success rate. Jay, I wouldn't want to tell the audience my overall success rate in exploration, but it's not close to 1 in 3. So I think all 3 of these mechanisms, well, 4, including my own, are extremely valid. The audience is looking for a one-size-fits-all answer, and that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Okay, so one thing that you said there, Rick, was just due to the ratio of companies that actually find success go with 3,000 to 1 or even 100 to 1, but therefore any JV should be somewhat accretive because you're consolidating some of that waste, I suppose.
You're offloading the financial risk on the senior partner.
Yeah. And you know, as a comment that Frank Juster made on this stage this morning, he said the biggest problem with this sector is how many companies are in it, right? There's too many companies out there raising capital. You know, a common piece of sentiment that I hear from company CEOs is that it's really tough to raise cash right now. There's a scarcity of capital in this sector. Rick's like, give me that question. I want to ask that question to the panel here. What is the health of capital availability in this business right now? And I'll put it to you, Rick, and I'll come back this direction.
The companies, this market is ludicrously overcapitalized. It's ludicrously overcapitalized. For most of the issuers, if they can raise money at any price, it's accretive, because they're worth nothing. Okay? It's ludicrously overcapitalized. I've tried to participate in probably 30 private placements in the last in the last year and a half. And at least 25 of the 30 were oversubscribed. I mean, I think of myself as a pretty good investor. I'm patient. I try to bring more than money. Some people respect me. And I found myself in the placements I really wanted to get into, getting not merely cut back, but cut back pretty radically. And then people tell me that the industry is undercapitalized. Well, if it's so undercapitalized, how come I can't write checks? That makes no sense. Now, when the lame, the halt, and the blind go out to try to finance amalgamated aardvark explorations, of course they can't raise money. And I think that's a very healthy thing.
Any similar perspectives, counter perspectives on the panel here?
I would agree with Rick. Well, to an extent, I would say that definitely if you have a good project, you will be able to raise money. And I have seen good deals being oversubscribed, and I have seen bad deals being hung. Hung meaning they can't close the deal, there's not enough. Because people are smart. People do their research, and they, if they've been burned with a management team, they're not going to do it again, hopefully, right? So I kind of agree with Rick, actually, yeah. Although, again, as an equity person, we're not seeing inflows into equity funds in general, but the money is becoming smarter, I would say.
Over the last year, I've been to quite a few conferences and meeting with different investors. It feels like there's a lot of sort of new investors coming into the sector, or at least starting to, which I think is very healthy. I think a lot more education's going out as well about how to invest in the sector, to understand the sector, rather than just hearing a good story and going for it. So I think, and teaching people how to do due diligence as well.
Could I? And Natasha, something to add there?
Well, I would add again, I would go back to the teams because I think it's uneven, right? If you see a good team that's had success raising money, I think that's great. I think there are also some teams who aren't so good but are really good at raising money. And, you want to learn to figure out the difference, right?
Yeah, 100%. And Alex, I might ask you now to help us figure out that difference a little bit. Given the stage of company that you look for, I think it's a good stage of company for people in this audience to start with that, mid-tier junior producer or near-term producer. So, as much as you can simplify, because it's an extensive process for you and you have a whole team working on this, and I don't know how many deals you look at in a calendar year, but it's probably in the 4 figures. If you could walk the audience through a bit of a cheat sheet, how do they get to the no when they're looking at a company, and the idea is to get it off the desk, because there's enough out there to look at, right? So the idea is to get to the no as quickly as possible.
You want to kill things fast.
You want to kill things fast,
yeah. Absolutely. For us, it comes down to the deals we're seeing and the investment opportunities, a lot of referred to people through our network. So again, it's the management team, which has become obviously a very common theme on this particular topic. And then we look at it as, what is the company's vision? Where do they want to go? What constraints do they have? We look at it from a technical point of view. So we do a desktop review. If it technically makes sense, if we can get to agreed terms, we believe in their vision, understand their constraints, and we get a term sheet agreed, then we do extensive third-party DD. That's hiring independent engineers, that's hiring the legal DD, the ESG, the tax review, all of those things. Only then, if you're still in agreement on terms, as we've identified the risks and gone through the profile and we feel they've been mitigated, would it then turn into a transaction. So yeah, we look at a lot of opportunities. We've been advancing some that haven't made it into the portfolio for various reasons. For us, and I think it's with anyone, it's your own capital in these companies. We're all large shareholders. So we're very aligned to ensure that the transactions we do and the investments we do will make sense long term.
The very first thing you said really struck me. You said most of the deals we see are referred to us, and we look at who referred them. And that's such a great question for investors to ask when you're looking at a new deal, to ask the question, where did I hear this from? Who told me about this, right? And what's the quality of that referral? Because as Natasha mentioned, there's a lot of great promoters that are not great company builders. And so the probability that you're going to hear about a great promotion instead of a great company is actually higher, right? Which makes this job a lot tougher.
So on that theme, I guess, for the audience, if you are looking at a stock, look at the ownership that the management team has in their own stock. That'll help you assess whether they're in it just for a paycheck or for long-term value, right? As you mentioned, you're shareholders of your own company. Yeah. So that's very important. That's something we look for more and more, and question management teams to make sure that they actually have skin in the game, right?
That they're completely invested and aligned with the shareholders, not just trying to get a salary, a bonus, or a change of control, that they really are aligned to ensure the company succeeds.
Rick?
Jay, I want to bring this back to cash.
Let's go.
And I want to talk to the audience.
All right.
Y'all need cash, too. You're a pretty aggressive group, you're pretty speculative, and cash is boring. And right now, cash is expensive. it's expensive because the deposit interest rate that you're receiving, despite the government statistics, is less than the deterioration of the purchasing power of your dollar, which is to say that cash is costing you money. But in your portfolio, that foregone interest, the depreciation of your purchasing power, can be best thought of as an option payment. If we have a liquidity crisis, or if this bear market lasts longer than we think, having the cash gives you the ability to take advantage of the illiquidity of others, rather than being taken advantage of yourself. I remember very well 2009. I went into 2008 pretty well cashed up. And because I had the experience and the expertise to take advantage of an illiquid market, I was able to put that liquidity to very, very, very good advantage. So when we're talking about cash, don't just think of it from an issuer's perspective. Think about it from y'all's perspective. The cash gives you the ability to act and to take advantage of illiquid circumstances. And when you find yourself in an illiquid circumstance, when nobody else has the courage to push the button, then you got to remember that you have to push the button. It's hard to have cash going in. It's hard to spend the cash coming out. But it's those periods in time when the markets are in crisis, if you're financially and psychologically capable, that you make most of the money that you're going to make in the whole decade.
Okay, so I have to ask you, Rick, you talked about this industry being overcapitalized, but how is it valued? You know, what you just said, you have to be the investor who's willing to walk into the sector. Effectively, you got to be the guy who's willing to walk into the burning building when everyone else is running away, right? That's what you've done and made a career out of.
If I understand your question, I would suggest to you that the senior producers in the precious metals business are fairly valued, and that's occurred only twice or three times before in my career. There's no price in the seniors, I think, for the upside in precious metals, which is extremely attractive. For the juniors, that's a different circumstance. I believe that 85% of the juniors that are listed on a global basis are valueless. I believe they're worth nothing. And so I believe the junior sector is perpetually overvalued. That disguises the fact that the best 10% of the issuers generate so much performance and so much value that they add legitimacy and sometimes luster to a sector that's 85% flotsam and jetsam. If you do the work, I'll give you a commercial. If you come to Jay's conference and walk around, talk to the exhibitors, learn the lessons, if you learn to separate the 10% from the 90%, this is actually a hell of a sector. If you don't, good luck to you.
I love that. Now, there was one key takeaway I want to share with everybody here. When you're walking around that show floor, and I think it was Alex who mentioned this, how many shares does the management own? That was the question she posed. If you're a new investor in this sector, that can be an uncomfortable question to ask. If you're talking to a company CEO at a trade show booth, you may not feel ready to ask that question. So I would just say, set a personal goal of doing that 10 times today. Just hit every booth, hit as many as you can, and whoever tells you about their company, the first question you ask should be, that sounds amazing, how many shares do you own? And just get used to asking the question. You'll learn a ton. Now, another great takeaway here was where did you get the deal from? Where did the referral come from? And it helps to have a steward. It helps to have some mentorship in this industry big time. And I've been fortunate. I've got like a team of mentors that have helped craft me as an investor. But the company you keep really does matter. And Alex is going to give you the final word here. You're a strategic investor in this sector. Empress Royalty is a vehicle that people can invest in. That means come along for the Empress journey as you're looking for value in this industry and trying to find those undervalued near-term producing companies. So I just want to give you the final word. Walk us through the value proposition of Empress Royalty.
No, thank you so much, Jay. It's also what we're investing in, but it's also the people who have invested in us, and happy to talk through that. We've got the booth over there. The value proposition for Empress is we are significantly undervalued. I know it's a cliche, but our net asset value portfolio is close to $70 million. We've got over close to $80 million coming in cumulatively over the next 5 years, just in our current portfolio, and our market cap is just under 30 million. So the numbers speak it, and we've got the numbers out there to talk through. We've got the financials there. And as you, our investors, are talking with companies, all the filings are also available on Cedar Plus. So you can go through, read through the financial statements. You can see how many shares through CD. You can find this information out before you purchase a single share.
Okay, I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, did we learn something? Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.